Euromaxx Highlights. And here's your host, Karin.
November the 9th, 1989, the night the Berlin Wall fell. And with that, a warm welcome to our Euromaxx highlights, the biggest highlight being a very special anniversary for Germany. It was 25 years ago that those events shook the world back in 1989, and for the occasion, we thought we'd bring this program right out to the scene of the action. We're leaving our studio behind tonight, and just like they did back then, hitting the streets of Berlin to remember this momentous event. And here's a look at what's coming up. Memorable moments. We look back at some of the most iconic images from the fall of 1989. Border of lights, what 8,000 balloons have to do with the Berlin Wall. And turning points, how the end of East Germany rocked people's worlds. Well, it was after World War II that Germany was divided into two states, the Federal Republic in the west and Communist East Germany in the east. Now, the city of Berlin itself was also divided, and for 28 years, the Berlin Wall was an ominous symbol of oppression. Now, I'm standing on what used to be the East German side, and the Berlin Wall ran behind me there, just beyond the Brandenburg Gate. When it fell on November the 9th, nobody was expecting it to happen, and many of the scenes that played out here that night are now etched into the nation's collective memory.
November 9th, 1989, in Berlin. Thousands of people poured across the open border. East and West Germans celebrated the fall of the Berlin Wall together. It was a time of celebration and euphoria. And the images went around the world. The historic event was captured in countless pictures. Frankfurt photographer Barbara Klemm was also there. It's still a powerful memory for her.
What happened that night was so important that you just had to go there right away. For a photographer and cameraman, it was the greatest experience you can imagine.
Early on the morning of November 10th, the Frankfurter Allgemeine newspaper sent Klemm to Berlin.
There weren't any cell phones back then, so I didn't even know where to go. There were huge crowds everywhere. Then I went to Brandenburg Gate. People were up on the wall, and it was an amazing atmosphere, very emotional. So first, I took pictures of the crowds, and then I decided to take a look over in the east. So I stood there waiting for my turn at the ladder. There were some border guards in a cordon, but it was all very relaxed, nothing military-like. Some of the young people on top of the wall tried to flirt and chat with them, but the border guards were still a bit shy, of course.
Long lines of Trabant cars motoring across the border, another iconic image. 2 days after that historic evening, on November 11th, Karin Blohm and Kerstin Reza from Schwerin also drove to the west for the first time. They were photographed at the border, on the Autobahn. Newspapers everywhere picked up the photo. Even 25 years later, they still have fond memories of their adventure.
We just started out. We didn't even think about running out of gas or where we'd get money. 4 young girls, starry-eyed, just thrilled. And we just hopped into the Trabi and drove off.
Her East German passport with a handwritten 13-digit number. That was her ticket to travel across Germany, to see new cities and make new acquaintances. For the young women, it was like the world had opened to them.
The scent of the West, when you came from East Germany, it was indescribable. Everything just smelled wonderful.
But it was Berlin that drew the biggest crowds. People from across Germany and the world flocked there. And of course, they all took pictures. Each photograph has its own story to tell. Some are on display at Berlin's old Checkpoint Charlie crossing point. One shows Eckbert Schauer of East Berlin. It was taken by a good friend from West Berlin. Shortly after the wall came down, they went on holiday.
This was spring 1990. The weather was nice again, so the two of us, an East German and a West German, leapt at the chance to do a bike tour from the Rhine River to Berlin. Our last stop was the wall, which had divided us before and now had brought us together.
The photo was taken in the Kreuzberg district, where the no man's land between the borders was especially wide. But today, there's nothing left of the wall there. What remains are the memories of the moment when his life changed from one day to the next.
For my generation, it was a very different experience than for our parents. They had a much harder time of it. They were all established, settled, and suddenly everything was different. But for us, it was a dream come true. We just lapped it up.
Barbara Clem also found herself drawn back to Berlin again and again. One of the highlights, the opening of the Brandenburg Gate in December 1989.
As I was headed back to the west, I turned around and saw that wonderful light, so diffuse, with people still on the wall. And I knew that was the picture I wanted. That was the defining moment of this huge world event.
Even 25 years later, the images and the memories are as powerful as ever.
Well, that's for sure. And where all those people came flocking to 25 years ago, they are flocking this very weekend. And they'll want to see, of course, where the Berlin Wall actually stood. Now, it's a very discreet line of bricks in the road that marks its path today, leading, for instance, right by the seat of German government, the German Bundestag that you can see behind me. Many Berliners are even hard-pressed to show you where the wall actually stood. And that's why, for this anniversary weekend, the city has created what it calls a Lichtgrenze, or a light border. For 15 kilometers, 8,000 of these helium-filled balloons will symbolize the Berlin Wall and, of course, the incredible impact that it had on people's lives.
The death strip that divided Berlin for nearly 30 years used to be illuminated by the harsh glare of searchlights. Today, the same site is bathed in the gentle light of thousands of glowing orbs. Dozens of people died attempting to escape over the Berlin Wall. This weekend's Lichtgrenze, or Border of Lights, symbolizes the city's division and also serves as a beacon of hope. This magical temporary wall was lit up on Friday evening and has cast quite a spell on the general public.
It's a really fantastic installation. You can walk along and get a real sense of where the wall used to stand. I think it's a great idea to recreate the wall with balloons at the exact height it was.
Brilliant, just great. A fantastic installation, no doubt about it. I'm going to walk along the entire route. It's fun. I'm discovering neighborhoods I've never seen before.
Berlin's Mayor Klaus Wowereit turned on the installation on November the 7th. It was the moment that brothers Christopher and Mark Bauder had been working towards for the last 18 months. They were the ones who devised it.
I'm just glad it's been lit up, that the balloons are in place and it looks like it's working. When it's over, I'll have time to reflect on it all a bit more. I've just been watching the way people walk by. It's really interesting to see how they react and what they say to one another.
The East German leadership erected the wall in 1961 in a desperate attempt to stem the exodus of frustrated citizens. It was patrolled by guards day and night. Anyone who tried to illegally cross to West Berlin risked their life. Mark and Christopher Bauder first came up with the idea of recreating the border with balloons around 5 years ago. Mark is a filmmaker, Christopher a renowned light designer. They had plenty of experience to pool, but the project still posed a major technical challenge.
It's designed to look very delicate. You're supposed to just be able to see the illuminated balloon. The stem is very slim, but it had to be strong enough to withstand winds and November weather, drops in temperature and so on. They'll be lit up for 3 days with batteries, and on the third day they'll be let go into the skies.
The various components were made in a workshop that employs people with disabilities in Potsdam, outside Berlin. There was absolutely no margin for error. A dress rehearsal wasn't an option.
There's a lightness to the installation, but it does have historical depth and gravity. It symbolizes deaths too, failed escapes and the orders to shoot. You definitely get a sense that there's more to it than just a path through the city.
Mark Bauder put together a collage of film that is being shown on screens along the Trail of Lights. It features footage from the years of Berlin's division. For many visitors, it makes for painful viewing.
We lived through the division, from the very beginning to the very end, all 40 years of it. The peaceful revolution means an awful lot to me.
It's very moving to be here and see it in person. Normally it seems so far away, but you can't actually grasp it until you're up close.
The point of the Lichtgrenze is to make people reflect on what the wall stood for, and of course, its miraculous fall.
The next generation will no longer carry this trauma with them, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they deal with it. I feel this 25-year anniversary could mark a milestone in the process of coming to terms with this past.
Beautiful and affecting, his installation certainly is one of the highlights of the anniversary celebrations in the German capital this weekend.
And the amazing thing about the events of 1989 is that they took everyone by surprise. Overnight, the Berlin Wall was transformed from a militarized death strip into something of a festival grounds. And in geopolitical terms, it was a night that changed the world. Now, on the ground here, people were all of a sudden able to approach this landmark behind me, the Brandenburg Gate, which had been off limits for 28 years. The opening of this border was a life-changing event for millions of Germans in both East and West. And we looked at 3 prominent examples.
Scorpions frontman Klaus Meine, actress and singer Jeanette Biedermann, and gallery owner Gerd Harry Lübke. Their lives were shaped, each in a different way, by the fall of the Berlin Wall 25 years ago. Klaus Meine in front of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. The political events inspired the Scorpions frontman to pen his greatest hit, Wind of Change. It became an anthem for the collapse of communism.
The fall of the wall was a very emotional moment for me. I am grateful I could experience this moment in history, not as the Scorpions singer, but as a German citizen.
At that time, the Scorpions had already been together for 20 years. They had made it big internationally with hits like Rock You Like a Hurricane in 1984. They were appearing in the US, Brazil, and all around the world, but they weren't allowed on the stage in East Germany. In 1988, the Scorpions slipped through the Iron Curtain to become one of the first Western bands to perform in the Soviet Union. They had 10 sold-out concerts in Leningrad, today's St. Petersburg. In the summer of 1989, a crowd of almost 300,000 cheered them on at the Moscow Music Peace Festival. Klaus Meine immortalized the mood in Wind of Change.
Follow the Moskwa down to Gonky Park, listening to the wind of change.
The song was basically an expression of hope, and it captured a moment. It was a time when things were changing, when it seemed like we could come together. We had no idea that just a few months later the Berlin Wall would fall.
Jeanette Biedermann recently presented her first children's book at the Frankfurt Book Fair. Only 9 years old when the Berlin Wall fell, the East Berlin native became a singer. She's also had success as an actress, with roles in several German television productions.
I always wanted to be a singer and an actress, so I would have done it in the East too. But the difference is that if the wall hadn't fallen, I would have done it within much narrower constraints. That's exactly what my parents didn't want for me.
The Biedermann family also decided to flee East Germany before the wall came down. They joined the throng of East Germans headed for the West German embassy compound in Prague. In September 1989, around 4,000 refugees had gathered in the Czech capital, hoping they would be allowed to leave for the West.
It was unbelievably crowded. My mother and I lived for 3 days in a stairwell. There wasn't much to eat. The children shared a yogurt now and then, and it was incredibly loud from morning to night.
On September 30th, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, West German foreign minister at the time, appeared on the embassy balcony and spoke half a sentence that made history.
Dass heute Ihre Ausreise.
What a goosebump moment it was when this man stood up there and couldn't even finish his sentence. And the people shouted at the top of their lungs because finally something was changing. Someone was keeping their word. Someone was breaking these chains.
Diese Ketten sprengt.
Gerd Harry Lübke was born in Leipzig. He was in his late 20s when the wall fell. Today, he's an internationally renowned gallery owner.
If the Berlin Wall hadn't fallen, I'd probably be dead now.
He's convinced that if East Germany had held on longer than it did, he would have risked his life to flee the country. In 1983, Lübke founded the first and only private gallery in East Germany. Eigenart was an experimental space for artists who, just like the owner, were staunchly independent. Lübke was kept under surveillance by the secret police, but his Leipzig gallery was allowed to stay open. Lübke heard about the fall of the wall while at a party at the University of Music and Theatre.
I was at the party and I didn't believe that the wall had opened. The next morning we were all wondering why the streets were even emptier than usual. And we thought, oh no, the last one has to turn off the lights. Now we're the only ones left, and they've probably closed the wall again.
But the border remained open, and Lübke left to explore the world. His first stop was Tokyo, then Paris and New York. He's credited with discovering the artists Neo Rauch and Martin Eder. That helped contribute to the success of the new Leipzig School, one of the defining art movements of post-reunification Germany. 25 years later, people whose lives were changed by the fall of the wall look back. And how do they see the present and future?
The way I operate a gallery, a third person has entered the scene. This third person between me and the artist is the money. This person, who almost has a physical presence, has stepped in between us. If things had remained as cozy as before, we likely wouldn't have been so successful.
Every person who fled, every person who took to the streets and shouted, "We are the people," everyone who rose up against that regime chipped away a bit of the wall. And that's exactly what I learned from my parents, to fight for freedom. For me, my parents are heroes, to this day.
I'd like all of us in Germany to hold on to and remember the emotions that we felt at that historic event, that peaceful revolution. That's something we shouldn't forget.
Das war diese Emotion, dass wir die nicht vergessen.
emotions with a capital E, and I must admit that those images of 1989 never fail to give me goosebumps. Well, I'm standing now on the top of our very own studio, just so that you can have a look at the fabulous view of Pariser Platz here behind me, and further off in the distance, Potsdamer Platz. The Berlin Wall and its legacy has long been a source of inspiration to many artists all over the world for decades now, and just some weeks ago, British best-selling author Ken Follett published book number 3 in his Century trilogy. The Edge of Eternity, as it's called, deals with the 28 years of divided Berlin, making it a history lesson and entertainment all in one.
Welsh writer Ken Follett has come to Cologne from London, bringing the drizzle along with him. Just in time to mark the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, he unveils a present from his German publisher. It's an original piece of the wall, painted like the cover of the German edition of his latest book. The novel deals with the Cold War, the era in which the wall still stood, separating the opposing Eastern and Western blocs.
I remember the fall of the wall, and what I remember about that is that we didn't believe it was permanent. Sitting in London, the same for people who were in the United States, we saw this happening and we thought, yes, but tomorrow the tanks will arrive. Because we had seen this before in Hungary, in Czechoslovakia and Poland, where there had been a kind of rebellion against the communist system, but in the end the rebellion had been crushed. And a lot of us thought that the same thing was bound to happen again.
For Edge of Eternity, Ken Follett did lots of research on location. The book intertwines the stories of 5 families from the US and Europe. Much of the action takes place in divided Berlin.
There are several scenes in Edge of Eternity where somebody tries to escape. And of course that kind of scene is all about the physical detail, how high is the wall, or how far do they have to jump, or what is the barrier like that they have to crash through, and all of that stuff. Those details are terribly important, and that was quite difficult to research because, happily for all of us, the wall is no longer there.
For the last 35 years, the former journalist has written one bestseller after another. Ken Follett's books have sold around 130 million copies worldwide.
I always wanted to be a star, right from a young age. And, when I was very young, I didn't care what kind of star. I just wanted to be a star. Authors aren't supposed to say that. Authors are supposed to say I had a message to give the world, and it wasn't like that for me. It wasn't like that for me. I wanted to entertain people. I wanted them to love my story.
Follett's latest novels end his Century trilogy, which began with Fall of Giants and Winter of the World. In Edge of Eternity, he follows the stories of the same families, whose fates are closely linked to world history.
Well, my stories are about quite fundamental things that affect everybody. I write about wars and revolutions, but also about love and marriage and raising children. The dramas in my books are things I think that most people can identify with.
And his fans just can't get enough. Follett's readings are sold-out affairs, like here in Cologne. The celebrity author can't resist divulging interesting tidbits.
Mimi Alford recently wrote a book about her affair with President Kennedy. She kept the secret for 50 years. She's an old lady now, and so I sent her an email and said, would you be one of my consultants? And she read the scenes in which the young woman goes to bed with President Kennedy, and she made some corrections, and she gave me some additional information.
Follett also consulted Angela Spissig, whose family comes from East Germany.
I told him things about my history and my parents, about how we lived in East Germany and how my parents prepared to flee. He made some notes in his book, and at the end he told me, I wrote down every word you said.
Ken Follett's next book is already in the works. He plans to take his readers on another trip back in time with a spy thriller about the beginnings of the British Secret Service in the 16th century.
Well, that brings us to the end of our Fall of the Wall anniversary Euromaxx highlights. Don't forget that you can find our show and much more on our website. If you'd like extra information, just go to dw.de/English/Euromaxx. And of course, next time I'll be back in my cozy studio as usual. So until then, all the best from this wonderful and exciting city. Tschüss und auf Wiedersehen.